Welcome to the App Setup lesson, where we initialize our Visual Studio application to get ready to start using it and start building into it. So here I have Visual Studio open. I have 2017 Enterprise Edition, but if you have 2017 Community Edition, that's not a problem. It's pretty much the same thing. There'll be a couple differences that we won't really see in this application. Now, if you have an older version of Visual Studio, I would encourage you, unless there's a reason not to, meaning you have a super slow computer that's running, say, Windows XP, okay, that's a problem. Or if you have a corporate environment that says you can't, that's another problem. But otherwise, get the 2017 Community Edition of Visual Studio. It's free, and it's wonderful. So definitely upgrade to that. Don't stay where you're at on an older version of Visual Studio just because. Okay? So in 2017, I'm going to say File, New Project, and we're going to create our application. Now, we know we want a WPF application, so I'm going to start with that. So WPF app, .NET Framework. That's important. That's a .NET Framework. And we're going to call this the build time. Let's call this build time. We'll leave it at that. That's what the exe will be named as. Typically, I say like UI or WPF UI, but I'm not sure I want to do that for this particular one. I may just call it build time, and then the solution name will be build time app. Okay, and as far as the repos go, let's put it in that same folder where our database is, and we'll then copy it into our project. Okay, so that's a WPF app. We're going to call it build time, and then the solution name is build time app. It's different, and I want it to be different. I don't want my solution and my project named the same thing. I hit OK. And there we go. We have build time, and we have our build time app. Next, we're going to right-click on the solution and say Add, New Project. And this time we want a class library. But notice here, and this is kind of tricky, we have .NET Standard and .NET Framework. There's also a .NET Core version and some other versions of the class library. For this application, since we're using WPF, we're going to do a .NET Framework class library. I don't think we have to necessarily. We could probably get away with a .NET Standard library. Now, if you're not familiar with .NET Standard versus .NET Core versus .NET Framework, I would encourage you to watch my YouTube video on .NET Standard, because that will go over the differences. Essentially, .NET Standard is an interface for all the different project types. But there will be a couple of differences in how it works compared to .NET Framework. While watching this video, that's fine. It's just that you may end up with a couple of code differences, and you may come across something where you can't do it in .NET Standard and have to resort to the full .NET Framework. So, build time library, .NET Framework, and that's it. We're going to hit OK, and we'll delete class 1. Now we can look at the properties and look at the framework version. We can go a little higher. I typically go the latest framework version, which in this time is 4.7.2. So we'll do that for this as well. Now, if you don't have 4.7.2 as an option in your list, you can just Google it. But there is a .NET SDK essentially you download for each different version of the .NET framework. In this case, 4.7.2 is what you're looking for. Okay, so that gets us our latest version as of where we're at right now. The next thing I want to do is I can't add a class reference yet. If I go to references, just so you know, and go to projects, I guess I can. Never mind. I apologize. It used to be that since there was no classes in here, there was no nothing to grab onto essentially, and so it wouldn't allow you to add a reference. But it does. So great. So now I have a reference in my build time WPF application to my build time library application. So you don't want to add a reference from the library to the build time. That's the wrong direction. And you can't add a reference both ways because that's what's called a circular dependency. Okay, next I need to add the ability to talk to SQLite to my build time library. So right click on references, go to manage NuGet packages, and I'm going to search for a couple packages. The first one I want to get is the SQLite, SQLite. And I'll say system.data.SQLite. That allows us to talk to the library. All right. Now notice down here the supported versions. So .NET Framework versions is what it supports. So we will say install the latest stable version, which is 1.0.108. All right. We hit install. All right. And then once that's installed, we can go on to the next thing, which, there we go. And that is I want Dapper. So I use Dapper for all of my data access because of the fact that it's really powerful, it's really tiny for an ORM, and it really just works out of the box. I mean, it's so easy to use that it's almost silly. So go ahead and install that version of Dapper. Now it does say I have one update to do. Let's see what that is. Entity Framework. I'm not going to update Entity Framework. I don't need to, because I'm not going to use Entity Framework. And in fact, since it's installed, I could uninstall it. I believe the reason why it installed Entity Framework is because the SQLite package depends on a number of packages, including EF6. I probably just need the core, but I'm not sure if I can get away with that or not. So I'm going to leave it as is. So I'm going to bring this over here. I'm going to copy this, not cut it. I'm going to copy it and come in here to build time, and I'm going to paste this file right there. And now on build time, I'm going to select the project, and this icon up here, show all files. I'm going to click it, and notice build time DB is here. So I'm going to right click and say include in project, and then unclick this show all files. And now I'll make sure that this is build action is, I believe it's a content, and it is copy if newer. Okay, so that's kind of important there, because what's going to happen is when we build this, and in fact, let's just do that. Let's run the build solution. And there we go. It's been built. And now if we come back over here in our build time WPF application, go to bin, debug, and notice we have our exe, and we have our config file. We have our build time DB database, and we have our build time library DLL. So we can just grab, when we're ready to, we can grab this file, this, and this, and we can paste that into a different computer or somewhere else. And as long as it has .NET Framework 4.7.2 installed on the machine, we'll be able to run our executable and access its copy of the database. Okay? So now we've got that set up. So now what we need to do is we need to set up our connection string. So app.config, we need to add a system for connecting to our SQLite database. So let's add a section here for connection strings. Then inside there we're going to add, and we'll say name equals, let's call it default. And the connection string equals data source equals dot slash and our name of our database, which is buildtimedb.db. And we'll make sure that it is version equals 3. So that's the connection string. You can get that from connectionstrings.org, I believe. I'm not positive, but that's you can look up SQLite connection strings and get the different types of connection strings you can do. Now I'm doing a relative path to the location of the executable. Now, if I were to have a have our connection string set up, it's called default. Okay? So that's our app.config set up. We have our library set up, and now we can get started on building our application. So really this application is all configured and just ready for us to start making something out of it. Okay? And that's really where we want to stop for this app setup. It's tempting to add just one more thing because we see code, we see progress. It'd be nice to make our main window into that parent window so we have children inside of it and set that up and all the rest, add our menus. But we want to stop here because if we follow a set pattern and are disciplined in how we create our application, then it's a lot easier to make sure we start a project and finish it, and not just start and get distracted and forget where we were and then miss a step. Okay, so this discipline of on to the next lesson.